and we'll go ahead and get started today. So welcome to our July webinar, Managing a Successful IT Conversion at Your Institution. We're expecting a strong turnout today, and I'd like to thank everyone for participating in the session. Let me begin with a brief overview on how this webinar will be run, and then I'll introduce our facilitator. My name is Jessica Alfaro, and I'm a manager at CapPlus Exchange. I'm very pleased to have met or communicated with several of you earlier and to meet with the rest of you today. For those of you joining us for the first time, here's a little bit more information on CapPlus. CapPlus Exchange enables financial institutions in emerging markets to serve small businesses more effectively and profitably. Dedicated to increasing people's economic opportunities by strengthening financial services to small businesses, CapPlus provides financial institutions with strategic and operational capacity building, training and peer learning, and pilots of innovative solutions to expand markets. For this webinar, we have muted all the voice lines going through to improve the sound quality, but we do encourage you to submit your questions by typing them into the chat box on the GoToWebinar app on the right-hand side of the screen. Feel free to put in those questions throughout the webinar, and we'll either ask those questions aloud to our facilitator or we'll save them until the end for the discussion period. Let me now share a little bit more about our facilitator. Malith Gunasakara is an independent technology, digital financial services, e-health and fintech advisor providing specialized advisory services to facilitate technology innovations in developing and developed countries. Malith is also the co-founder director at eTreat Medical Diagnostics in Vancouver, Canada, a digital health company also rated as one of the top 100 M-Health companies in 2015, building mobile apps and cloud-based processing that turn mobile phones into true medical devices. He has 30-plus years of experience in information technology working in 40 countries and has helped many FIs to develop their ICT strategies and help them to implement core banking systems and delivery channels. We'd also like to invite you to join us in Beijing. We are proud to again be a partner of the Global SME Finance Forum 2016, which is expected to bring together some 400 senior executives from commercial banks, development finance institutions, and fintech companies, as well as regulators. This event will highlight innovative SME banking approaches, showcase cutting-edge financial technologies, and address crucial policy and regulatory issues. You can register on our website, and please get in touch with me if you have any questions about this upcoming event. At this point in time, I will turn it over to Malith.
Thank you, Jessica. Welcome to our webinar on managing an IT conversion. The focus of this webinar is not on theory, but on real life and practical solutions to these real life situations. The purpose of this webinar is to highlight two fundamental IT conversion risk management strategies and to inform how the IT toolkit can enable financial institutions to be more self-sufficient in improving IT conversion projects and also outcomes. The contents of the toolkit is rich in detail, samples and templates, all of which is far too much material to cover in 1 hour at this webinar. But we will introduce you to the key concepts and tell you what some of those tools are and why they are helpful. We will present fundamentals of two major components essential to a successful conversion. They are project management and systems development lifecycle processes. We will go into details on those. We will provide many case studies and examples throughout our discussions, demonstrating how project management and systems development lifecycle steps, as well as the toolkit, were or could have been applied. At the conclusion of this webinar, we hope to leave you with an understanding of the concept and the need for project management and systems development lifecycle approach when your financial institution is faced with a major system conversion. We will conclude our webinar with an opportunity to submit questions, which we will try to answer either now or offline.
Thanks, Malith. for this overview. You mentioned one of our objectives was to help financial institutions achieve better system conversion outcomes. What are some of the key reasons for poor project outcomes?
Sure. At CapPlus, we have seen many institutions struggle with their system conversions for a variety of reasons. Many had poor project outcomes, but all had a common solution. This was actually the trigger for creating this toolkit. One of the most common reasons was lack of project management. This is actually a major issue, especially when you do IT conversion projects. In fact, many financial institutions assign the conversion responsibility to the IT manager rather than a line of business owners. IT managers typically skilled technically rather than in management. Further, most systems that are introduced serve multiple lines of business, which require inputs from the line managers or the line businesses. One financial institution we worked with was upgrading its core banking system, using the opportunity to increase functionality in several modules of the system and to enhance their MIS. The IT manager, fairly new to the financial institution, was placed in charge of this project. He just did not have the institutional clout to bring together the departmental users and along with other project businesses. After 5 months, the project failed. So these, you can see there are lots of reasons that projects fail, but this was one of the major ones. Secondly, the financial institution tend to rely heavily on vendors to effect workflow and product parameters, since they're the ones who knows the system best. This is another major drawback or a risk that a lot of the institutions take. It is the business owners who need to take control of the decision making, as these systems are what deliver the product to their clients. We saw one financial institution that systems were fully implemented, that they were unable to offer one of their core products, which was loans, and this institution almost took 3 years at a great loss, and not to mention opportunity costs of lost loan in interest income for that period to correct this situation. Lastly, rapid technology change may result in systems that are complex and beyond in-house skills to maintain and support. E-support from offshore, off-site may not be a solution for some of the institutions due to lack of IT literacy, knowledge and capacity. So these are some of the things that you need to check before you get on with a project like this. Certainly engaging technical assistance to help a conversion is a solution, but often expensive. Consultants are expensive. And in most cases, extensive assistance is required. I mean, most of the institutions had in-house developed systems, and when they move on to off-the-shelf packages or world-renowned packages, you need a lot of assistance to build capacity within. To help financial institutions manage their project, CapPlus has assembled this toolkit that helps explain the project management process in great detail and explains the goals, risk, prerequisites, tools used, and outcomes for each of the key steps in the system's development life cycle. These are two concepts that we will focus later in this webinar.
So now we've just gone over some of the reasons for the poor project outcomes. Could you also identify for us what some of the drivers or causes are for these poor outcomes?
Sure. I mean, system conversions require a lot of time and manpower, which may not be able to be harnessed as and when needed for the project. Usually, most senior managers will request new modules or features to be implemented within 3 months. I hope that's very familiar to all of you who are at this webinar. They want it in a very short period of time. What everybody needs to understand is that these cannot be professionally implemented within a short period of time. A new system implementation will take at least 6 to 12 months to procure, and another 6 to 18 months to implement depending on the factors or the modules that they choose. All too often, we see that project duration, which can be many months, saps project momentum. Staff are constantly called to serve urgent client needs and other full-time duties that they usually have to perform. And the same key staff are relied upon to serve both at the project and the ongoing operations. So this is, they have to share their time to do the project implementation as well as perform their normal duties. So without an adequate project management process, staff tend to view their project tasks as extra, and their regular jobs are their priority. Typically, we see that financial institutions do not have well-documented workflows or process maps describing their processes. Basically, we're talking about the manual of procedures, which hinder ability of the vendor as well as the project team to visualize how current operations are done. And the new system's functionality can be brought together optimally, resulting in more efficient and effective processes. So these are another drawback. Most of the institutions, they don't have a manual of procedures. In one case, we had a vendor who actually refused to understand their client processes in order to assist their client to adopt their system. Basically, what they said is, you adopt our system the way it is. In another, which shouldn't be the case unless there's lots of justification. I mean, if you're a startup financial institution, then yes, you could start off like that. But if you're an ongoing operation, it's going to be quite a challenge. In another case, we had an institution which well-documented procedures by functional area. They had it. But when trying to merge these procedures into one process workflow gap, contradictions and errors were noted. Remember, you need to implement a system with the workflow that you require. It should not be the vendor's workflow, it has to be your workflow.
I think that's very helpful advice on the workflow. You mentioned a bit about CapPlus's IT Toolkit as part of a solution for FIs to better manage their system conversion projects. Could you give us an overview of this toolkit and describe how it could help financial institutions?
Sure. CapPlus has worked with many financial institutions over the years, all of whom face the same challenges and constraints in addressing and solving their technology requirements. I mean, we've seen this happening over and over. While some individual differences in financial institutions' needs environments existed, the process and tools used by consultants over the years were fundamentally the same, regardless of the size or complexity of the institution. I mean, most use the same type of strategies and toolkits. The toolkit which assembles these procedures and tools were designed to be a practical guide with all sizes of financial institutions in mind. So basically, this toolkit can be used for any type of institution, any financial institution. There are comprehensive instructions for every step of the way in order to properly reflect professional and best practices. We recognize that many financial institutions with whom we worked are similar in size, and we have to modify the steps to fit their circumstances, but still provide best practices and professional standards. The toolkit identifies activities, risks, challenges, and key factors to consider, and has over 40 templates for tools to use during the project, several informational appendices, and is supplemented by a training course to help with the understanding and the use of the toolkit. Soon we will turn our attention to two major concepts in the toolkit: project management and systems development lifecycle.
Thanks. I think that's a good overview of the toolkit. I know we'll be going back to this to talk further about it. We've been discussing the need for better system conversion results, yet it seems that the beginning point is actually identifying when this is needed. what would you consider to be key considerations when contemplating the acquisition of and conversion to a new system?
Usually what happens is that a CEO is confronted with the IT manager who says that it's time to upgrade the system because of constraints, system resources, or poor response time, inadequate storage, or any other technical reasons, such as there is a new technology which has come and I think we need to upgrade it. These are some of the reasons. There's often the feeling of being held hostage by the IT department. This is the usual feeling in most institutions. Instead, IT needs to be aligned with the business as a strategic partner and a management need to undertake major systems conversion project in the same manner as it would be for any other strategic objective, beginning with a clear understanding of the core business strategy before being able to thoroughly evaluate any kind of investment. I think this is how you should look at whether you really need a system or not. Since a new system is a major investment, all systems are very, very expensive. You need to look at especially the transaction costs at the end of the day. Financial and human resources management needs to know why the new technology is being implemented, satisfy itself that all options and alternatives have been considered, and to identify what returns can be expected by this investment. These are some of the things that we need to look at. Some of the key questions, let me list down some of the key questions that needs to be answered. I think it's there in the slide. I'm not going to read it. But the first one, how does this investment further our core business strategy? These are some of the very, very important questions that needs to be answered, right? Also, the last one, what are the consequences if you don't make this change? If you don't do this, what happens? I think these are some of the questions that we need to try and answer.
Great. You made some good points for top managers to consider when making an investment in a new core banking system. Would you give us some examples of some valid key triggers to embarking on a major system conversion?
Yeah, there are many triggers, but I will tell you some of the major ones which I have listed here. An MFI might start mobilizing deposit because most MFIs cannot mobilize deposits, but they need to get licenses depending on what country you are. But when an MFI grows up to a certain level, there are different levels of regulatory approvals that you can obtain and then mobilize deposits. And this is a new module. Usually what you have is what you call loans and your back office systems to do your general ledger. So if you need a new module, yes, you need either a new module of the current system or a new system, right? Then you have a major growth in your loan portfolio. You may need a system purely because of system constraints and to support a growing loan portfolio. Some operations are decentralized, some want it centralized. This is another reason that we have seen for system conversions. Consolidate processing and have real-time information. That was another one. New products, I think we discussed, like online banking, e-banking. We're talking about mobile banking. There are lots of things that comes. There are new products and services that are there. Then also, the capacity of the system may not be enough to accommodate your financial institute's growth objectives. And a call has to be made when to change the system, whether we wait or whether we change it now. So these are some of the common triggers. There are many others. There are systems that doesn't perform the way you need. There are too many bugs in the systems. The system crashes. The database crashes. It's not a relational database. There will be lots of other reasons, but these are the main ones.
Now that we've looked at some of these triggers to decide if a new system is needed, could you give us an example of what happens if the conversion process is not well managed? And this would help us to set the stage before we move into the key concepts discussed in the webinar.
Sure, I'll give you an example of a bad implementation. I mean, this MFI had a head office and a branch network of 15 branches. The areas of computerization was loans and savings. They wanted application approval and management, centralized, consolidated general ledger. The initial challenges were that, identification of user requirements. These were defined by managers. I mean, you need to get senior management input, you need managerial input, you need to get operation managers' inputs. But one of the most important things is you need to get input from grassroots levels. That means people who sit at the counters, people who are on the field dealing with clients, people who are carrying out daily transactions at your back office as well as at the counter. Now, these were not done. So, requirements were done by the managers. Then the next one was the RFP. When I see RFP of 8 pages or less, or 10 pages or less, I know at once that this is not going very far. You can't define your user requirements in 8 pages or 10 pages. And believe me, most of the institutions, microfinance as well as financial institutions, when they start computerization projects, their RFPs are 10 pages or less. To document a loan process and your general ledger and look at your MIS, plus put down all your inputs, outputs, validations, controls, reports in detail, when you document it, it will be definitely more than 50 pages. So if you see an RFP with 8 pages, please don't go ahead, because you will end up in trouble. When the evaluation was done, there was no proper evaluation criteria. They didn't compare apples against apples. So they made decisions based on different criteria, different assumptions, and for different reasons. So even the decision was wrong in terms of who the vendor was. User training was not planned. For the user acceptance test, UAT, necessary stuff was not included. All controls are not validated. Audit was not included. So you need to always make sure that the risk management and audit are included. They also should sign off. Again, implementation was not planned and monitored. The only good thing was the data migration was completed because they didn't have too much of a volume. The cost, there was a cost overrun of 35% of the project cost. When I say project cost, it's just not software only, it's software, hardware, and the personal time put together. They had a 35% overrun, and that's a huge cost overrun for any institution. So these are some of the things that you need to start looking at. These are some of the things that you need to control, and always, as I said before, you need to always look at what's going to be the transaction cost at the end of the day, whether you can justify it or not. So this is one of the bad implementations that I have encountered, and I thought I will share this with you.
I think that's really helpful, and I think what your example clearly shows that several key factors were not well planned or organized, and that this institution would have benefited greatly from a project management approach. Could you now start the discussion of project management with an overview of its key components as it relates to this IT conversion?
Sure. The project management starts with an understanding of the project processes. So you need to identify the triggers. The triggers can be, why are we doing this project? What do we hope to achieve out of this project? These are some of the triggers that you need to think through and try and understand and define. By formalizing the project, clarifying the purpose and objectives, and creating the project structure, management has a better opportunity to actually monitor and manage the project throughout the duration, recognizing and thus correcting deviation in a timely manner. So this is a very important step before, the time that you start planning the project. These are some of the things that you need to do. The slide illustrates the life cycle of the project, basically initiating, plan, execute, monitor, control, and close. Most often, everyone is often so glad that the project is finally over, and it is the evaluation of the project and understanding lessons learned to apply for future projects is not thought of. You need to always ensure that that step is also done. This project process can also be applied for other types of projects within your financial institutions, but you may have to modify it to suit those projects. So this is an overview.
I think what you just mentioned is really important, that this project management can be used in other functions as well, and that's something that we saw that was really important from this toolkit and this portion of it. Each of the phases of the project management process, though, must have their own challenges. And so what do you see are some of the common risks and errors in managing the first phase or initiation of a conversion project?
Yeah, one of the biggest issues is that the project, you don't define the project correctly. You need to define the project, define the boundaries in terms of what you want to do and what you want to achieve, and what period that you want to achieve these things. Then you need a sponsor or an owner, and when some of the projects, they don't identify the sponsor or the owner, and there are so many people making decisions. So many people want different things to be defined or delivered. So that creates a lot of huge project risks at the initiation stage. Lack of buy-in from management and other departments is also another major issue. Some of the board of directors of some of the financial institutions, they approve to do a system conversion, but they don't get involved in the process. And this is something that is key, because an IT system or the system that you will implement is going to be the backbone of your organization to support operations as well as management decision making. So it's really key that the management, there is a buy-in and they take responsibility to be involved in the project. In a large project, everyone may not have the same understanding, as you know, of the requirements. There will be specialized areas, so this also is another risk that needs to be managed. Project budget, a lot of people start doing the budget after you start the project. This has to be done long before you start the project. And to get management commitment saying that, look, this is the amount that you have allocated. It looks like we need much more than that. Do we start the project, or we don't start the project? Or do we scale down? These type of decisions can be made if you have a proper project budget.
Let's talk a bit more about the initiation phase. Can you give us some examples of ways to mitigate these risks that you just identified during this phase?
Yes, I think the first thing that you need to do is create a project charter, which is it's the formal authority to undertake the project. It has to be in terms of a document describing. This document has been basically described in the toolkit. Sets out in clear language the mission, objective, deliverables of the project. Define stakeholders. You need to define the project team and any third parties or external resources required. We need to consider risks and the constraints, and at a higher level, formulate a work breakdown of the structure, basically more like an implementation plan. So that's basically the first thing that you need to do. Then you need to do the project initiation document, also described in the toolkit. Delves into more detail and background of the project to provide a firm business basis for the undertaking. This document includes the business case, the feasibility studies, and the project budget. The second phase of the project process lifecycle is project planning. This is in fact a solution to much of the risk of the project outcomes, that all aspects of project management are considered. So basically you need to do how the project work is scheduled. You need to identify the resources, human and financial as well as assets. How project risk and quality will be managed. Usually there has to be a person assigned for risk management and reporting at each stage of the project, and this has to be regular reporting. How assets will be procured. There will be certain guidelines that you need to put down. How project communication will be affected. This is another thing. Project communication has to be within the organization as well as with the outside. Your clients, maybe the central bank or the regulatory authority, you need to communicate with them. Identifying criteria for acceptance of the project work. This is often we see there are issues when the final sign-off comes with the vendor. This is being postponed. I've never seen anyone signing off acceptance of work during the project period that has been defined. It's always delayed. So the reason is these are not being defined in detail. The need to define approvals and acceptance authority and points were underlined in one of the financial institutions that we worked, who made their business case internally and progressed to the point of systems development cycle with the selected vendor. The board was asked to approve the selection, but in fact rejected the request because the project, because there were two different understandings and the project was set back by many, many months. So it's important that everybody stays on the same page, as well as if you identify most of these things and share it with the management, communicate it, manage risks, usually you could manage this stage quite well so that you could go forward.
What are some other risks that we could look at during some of the other phases of the project management process, like the execution or monitoring phases?
Yeah, execution is a phase. There are lots of issues that crop up. Usually it's the change to the scope. Whatever that has been written in the RFP gets changed here. And users will come and say, I need this, I need that calculation, I need this report and stuff like that. Or they will also, there have been instances where they try to change even the technology. So these are major risks, and usually these should have been addressed initially. One of the other things is that teams, especially users and other teams that you did put down, they don't meet targets, target dates. And probably they have made incorrect estimates of the effort that has to go in, and also the technical expertise required. So you need to sit down and plan. You need to think through. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example like data migration. Everybody thinks that data migration is really easy. It's not. You need to make a decision in terms of what data should be migrated, what is the history that has to be migrated. Then in the new system, there will be gaps in terms of data. Some in your data, telephone or a mobile number will not be available, or the email address may not be available. things like that, or next of kin, or your parents' name, or your wife's name, or things like that may not be available. You need to plan for these things, and it takes time to populate this type of data. So that's why I say, I mean, everybody thinks that it's easy, even when it comes to training. They say, okay, it's easy, we call all these people, but what you need to plan out is, okay, if you pull people out from branches, how are they going to manage? How are they going to operate? How are we going to go forward? These things has to be thought through and planned. What's the type of cost? We have to bring everybody from the branches to the head office or to a training locations. What's going to be the cost? Things like that has to be thought through. So at execution phase, there can be a lot of other issues. Planned resources, as you know, people may resign, they may go on leave, long leave, you know. They will be assigned for other priority tasks. I had a situation where there were 3 project managers during a space of 8 months, which shouldn't have been the case. And then when you have changes like that, these are huge risks, and it will cause delays and project cost overruns and stuff like that. Capacity of budget, I think I spoke about this earlier. Impact assessment has not been completed. That is something that needs to be done. And the worst thing is the end result does not satisfy the user. So everything that has been done is of no use or waste, I would say. And these are some of the things that I have covered. You can't identify all risks during the initial planning phase, but it's necessary to keep on updating the risk assessment document on a regular basis to ensure that some of these risks are covered. I'll talk about more pitfalls, especially in the monitoring stage. Frequency and adequacy relevance of monitoring points are identified for all stages of the project to reduce risk of poor outcomes, such as increased cost due to rework and not being fully satisfied with the solution. So monitoring is also it's a very, very important stage of the project. You need to try and avoid rework. You need to ensure that all the user requirements are met. Monitoring, also you need to understand that monitoring risks are not outside the control of the project team. So it's the team is working effectively. These risks should also have a low probability of occurrence. So basically you need to ensure that even at monitoring phase, we need to have risk management team fully involved, working with the project team.
This is really helpful, Malath, and we do have a few questions coming in, but I'll save them for the discussion period. We do want to go back and look at, setting up the project. And from the initiation phase, where and what do you see is a good beginning to project planning for this?
Okay, one of the first tasks in the project planning phase is setting up of the project structure. You need to set up the structure. And this has to be agreed upon. The slide shows a functional team structure where the project team is organized and grouped by functional area. So responsibilities can be assigned by functional input. The system conversion can be a cross-functional project, not just responsibility of the IT department. This is something that I want to stress. A lot of the organizations think that this is an IT function. It is not. It's the cross-functional teams that has to take on the responsibility. So basically, they have to come together to execute a task, probably together. Also, you need to ensure that key positions, such as the project manager, should not be changed during the project. I think I covered this. I had one experience where I mentioned that there were 3 project managers within 8 months, which shouldn't be the case. As it will definitely impact the project duration.
Great. I think this is really helpful, and I know that people, always want to know more about the project roles and responsibilities. Can you give us, an example of this and just take us through some of this more specifically in the chart?
Sure. I mean, most of these positions should be there for a large project. For a small project, maybe you can scale it down. But an example is the project manager is responsible for the project scope and change control, but only accountable for plans, work breakdown structure, and schedules and project activities, as other project team roles are responsible for the actual execution. Your project may use different codes, right? So basically what I'm saying is there are a lot of the projects, everybody looks at the project manager to deliver everything, which is not the case. Project manager is responsible only for two major things, which is the project scope and the change control. The rest of it is more or less supporting roles, consultations, can be even information, right? He or she can be accountable, but as you see, from technical lead to functional leads to subject matter specialist to supplier side project manager to the project team, there are lots of responsibilities that they need to deliver. In terms of time, a project manager, I would say, has to be full-time, depending on the size of the project. If not, usually I have seen projects fail, especially in large projects. There has to be a full-time project manager. Technical lead also, and a functional lead, they can come in and go, but when they are assigned during a certain period of time, it has to be full-time. They can't do two jobs. They can't do the project implementation or project execution or planning with their normal job, because you won't be able to focus. So some of these positions has to be full-time. Some can come in and go off during the cycle of the project, but when they are assigned for that project, it has to be full-time so that they will focus. Most institutions, especially the senior management, might think that there's a lot of time to be spent on a project, but believe me, you're spending a lot of money implementing these type of projects, which is going to be your backbone for all the support services and operational services. And you need to ensure that these things are implemented properly after proper planning and ensuring that all the user requirements are met. So investing at this stage is really good than waiting till the sign-off of the project and then you find out that some of the requirements are not met. So my advice to everybody is please ensure that people that you assign for the project manager as well as the others, has to be focused on the project, and they should be released from other duties during that period, whatever that have been assigned.
Malith, there's definitely much more that we could cover on project management, but we do want to shift over to the second section and discuss system development lifecycle. We will cover, some of the questions on project management during our discussion period, and we can also answer those individually. So, Malith, could you start by giving us an overview of the components of the system development lifecycle?
Yes, the system development lifecycle, I mean, if I'm to explain it in detail, it will take a few hours, I would say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss this at a very high level. The system development lifecycle covers planning, creating, testing, and deployment of a new system. The slide shows the system development lifecycle, which is the framework and sequencing for the acquisition of a new system through to its rollout. This is in 7 stages of the system development life cycle, which is integrated into 4 steps in the procurement cycle, which has been defined on the other side. So this is basically, I'm giving this from a very high level snapshot of how system development lifecycle should be managed or run. We can go into details later on.
Great. I think that's a very, very helpful overview. What are some of the high-level stages that you just have identified, and how do they relate to the conversion tasks we commonly know and experience?
Sure. I mean, the system development lifecycle, the key task, I have put down in blue. This is actually from the execution phase of the project management process. The tasks we commonly associate with a conversion form only part of the conversion's project management process. Yet it is these steps that are often the sole focus of a conversion. Most of the conversions, they only look at these steps, but you could break it down, going down into further steps and sub-activities of these I would say, processes that have been defined. I'll take one as an example. If you take formulate RFP and evaluation scheme, one of the most important things that you need to do is appoint an evaluation team. And the evaluation team should not be just only from the management. It has to be from the operations, from the functional areas also. But it should not be a large team where you can't, in the end, build consensus and agree on certain decisions. I would say an evaluation team of 5 to 8 people maximum would be good. You need to also determine the contents of the RFP. What are the areas we should cover and how we should go about doing it. You have to also create RFP contents and get this. You need to get the contents finalized and approved. I think it's really, really important. So this is, I have taken one and gone into details. There are lots. I can go into all these other areas, which also defines the sub-processes. For instance, installation and commissioning of new equipment, which can be optional for some of the system conversion, I would say, projects, because you may not need new equipment, but things like business re-engineering is one of the things that you need to look at, purely because you should not be implementing the same business process. If you can improve it, why not? Sometimes vendors, they come up with new processes, which probably will be, which makes sense, or probably which is state of the art, or which is current, which may be good for institution to implement. One example I could give you is that if you look at loan processing, most institutions, they don't pick up information from application, and they don't process the application, and then either grant or reject the application. They only take information into the system after the loan has been approved by the Credit Evaluation Committee. Now, what you need to understand is that you lose a lot of data by not picking it up from the application itself. So these are some of the examples that you can, go into very, very great detail. But this is, I would say, an overview of the task in a conversion project.
Great. I understand that each of the stages of the system development lifecycle has its own framework and boundaries. Can you give us an example of how this framework is to be constructed and used in the toolkit?
Sure. I mean, the prior slide, each major stage of the system development lifecycle had its own mission. For the purpose of familiarizing you with the organization of the toolkit, this slide illustrates the framework for each stage, which has specifically identified goals with prerequisites, outputs, and risks associated with the task grouping identified. We'll do a walkthrough of this first stage. In the first step, the prerequisites are the outputs of the first two steps of the processes. The initiation and planning. These steps should have resulted in the project charter. The project initiation document and the various documents we saw in the prior slides covering the planning phase, including the justification and the budget. Note that these must be approved. The risks at this stage is incomplete user requirements. I think we have stressed a lot on this, which may result in product and services cannot be offered as desired or designed. Typically, a functional specification ends up being a laundry list of all imaginable functionality, which should not be the case. We need to try and identify the right ones. Any financial institution will try to cover all bases when they do a system conversion project. But as you know, conversions can be lengthy and costly processes. And what you need to try and do is you should plan for the medium term. You need to look at requirements, I would say 3 to 5 years. The laundry list of functions also indicate that the institution does not really have defined processes and product definitions in mind. In other words, it's really does not know what its requirements are. So don't have laundry list. Try to define your requirements between a period of 3 to 5 years, because most systems, the life cycle of this type of systems will be 3 to 5 years. The second thing that I want to cover is the workflow features. Has to be defined in detail. As I said, I told you about the RFP with 50 pages, right? So if you define detailed workflow, it will be 50 pages at least. And the workflow should include validations, controls, audit, reporting. When I say reporting, you need to even draw the report the way you will want it, including subtotals and grand totals, percentages, calculations. I mean, all the calculations that you want has to be defined in detail, because that's the document that the vendor is going to look at and say, I'm going to deliver this. And you can always hold the vendor responsible or accountable to deliver that as per the contract that you have signed. So if you have defined all these requirements, then it makes life easy during the project process or during the project management of the whole cycle. A well-defined workflow also definitely will help. Workflows need to be integrated, not only process step, but documents, produce required validations, control points. Workflows are also crucial to producing meaningful functional specifications. So from workflows, you take into functional specifications. Users require flexibility. This is something that I have always seen, saying that if I forget to talk about a report, or if I need a report down the road, how do I get it? So my suggestion is that when you write the RFP, put in a clause saying that during the project period of 12 months or 6 months thereafter, going live, you need to provide 15 additional reports or 25 additional reports that we will define, which the FI will define, which is not defined in the RFP. So you could cover some of those risks by putting in process like that.
Great. You know, we've looked at a lot of risks. What, in your experience, are some of the common pitfalls that financial institutions fall into, but could maybe be avoided through some of the best practice approaches you've outlined for us?
Yeah, if you look at the slide, I mean, one of the things that most institutions don't do is to check references. Now, what I mean by references is that it's not just only site visits. Sometimes site visits are for 1 hour with the client, purely because this reference client doesn't have time. But the way I would recommend or advise you to set up site visits is that you get commitment saying that we like one person for 3 hours, or one person for 2 hours in the morning and another person for 2 hours in the evening. You should talk to people in the front office as well as in the back office as well as in the management. You could check references like that, and most of the questions that you want to be answered will be answered, especially in the evening, if you meet them for a coffee. That has been my experience. Ensure that the vendor doesn't come for any of the reference site visits. They should only introduce you to the client, because the client will never talk good or bad. They'll talk about good, they'll never talk bad, or the issues that they face, or the risks that are challenges that they face if the vendor is present. So ensure that that's done. Also, usually vendors give a long list of references and just ask for their telephone numbers, and just pick 3-4 per vendor and just call them up and find out, have a list of questions and find out whether they're happy with most of these things or not, right? So these are some of the things that you may have to do. Also, please don't work only with the vendor's implementation plan. You need to have your own implementation plan. Like, take for instance, even before a project starts, you need to start planning, saying, okay, we need to assign people, we need to do ensure that our manual of procedures is in place. Have you updated the procedure? How are we going to do the data migration? Whether our data is clean, whether our data is audited. Stuff like that needs to be done long before the vendor comes into your institution for the implementation. You develop that plan and you look at the vendor implementation plan, which goes into great detail, and then you merge the two plans together and you manage that plan. So it's not the vendor's plan, it's not just your plan only, it's a merged plan of both tasks and responsibilities. When you put that down, you see that you can calculate the critical path. What are the critical activities? All those things can be identified. Often, a lot of people confuse familiarization with testing. They give the system to people, the users, to play around with. And sometimes vendors think that, okay, this is testing, which is not the case. To do testing, there has to be test data, there has to be test plans. Test plans have to be written down, and you need to test it going through every stage of that process. Take, for instance, if it's a loan, if you're keying in a loan application, you have to ensure that the application is keyed in, and you go through the process, and it's been sent to the credit evaluation committee online or printed or whatever the process is, and they approve it online, saying that this is fine or this is not fine, and it goes through that cycle. You need to ensure that all those steps are tested, and that is what you call testing, not just looking at a screen and putting some data. Please don't take any shortcuts to testing, because if you take shortcuts, you're bound to fail when you go live. Parallel runs is in the past. You don't run parallel. You test the system, you train your staff very well. When all of you are confident that you can run live on a certain date, you run live. You usually don't run parallel. because I have seen parallel runs which are done for 24 months. And it's a never-ending parallel run, and usually it ends up in a major, I would say, mess. That I would say that's the right word. You need to define the MIS systems. You need to start looking at from a very high level to ensure that MIS systems are defined, because when you can't define MIS systems right at the end of the project. You have to start doing it at the beginning of the project, purely because sometimes the information that is required for MIS system has to be picked up at the initiation level of the data. Like take, for instance, from the loan application, you need to pick up some of the information. So you have to ensure that you define the MIS at the beginning itself. Data migration is another classic example. It's compromise. Audit is not involved in it. You need to get the audit to sign off. They look at only, because they're in a hurry to go live, they want to transfer everything. There are certain strategies that are adopted to ensure that data is correct. You can do hash totals. There are lots of strategies that you can adopt. You can transfer two files, merge it, and see whether it's the same, stuff like that, whether there's data corruption that has occurred during migration. There are a lot of things that needs to be done. These things are not done. The other thing is most people don't make a decision about the history data. How much of history do you need? Whether it's 24 months, whether it's 36 months, or just 6 months. These are some of the pitfalls that you must avoid.
Thanks, Malith. We're almost out of time for our session today, and I do want to get into the discussion period. Can you just give us a quick overview, on what was successful about this other example that you want to share? And I'd like us to cover this in our LinkedIn group as well, but we will get to a couple of the questions after we finish very quickly with this example of a successful implementation and what they did right.
Sure. I mean, the scope of this project was it was a commercial bank, small branch network, but they were planning to grow pretty rapidly. They had their own ATMs and so also a link to third-party ATM networks because they want to cover their customers. Areas of computerization was savings, current savings loans, centralized consolidated GL, internet banking, and ATM. The success factors was the project management framework was in place. Board of directors had the buy-in, and they assigned an independent director to monitor the project process. So basically, this director sat on the project steering committee, where they put in a lot of time to ensure that things are done at the right time. Staffing was in place, all the resources were in place, and helped the project manager immensely. RFP was 100 pages, where the vendor had to respond to each requirement. Each line of the requirement, the vendor has to say whether it's in his standard product or whether he has to modify it. If it has to be modified, what's the percentage of the modification? Or if it's a new requirement, how long it takes, or if that vendor can't provide that requirement. So it went into details. Had a dedicated project manager, team of users, internal audit as well as risk management. So basically the functional people were also involved. Detailed vendor evaluation. They took a long time to do the evaluation. The vendors were given like 3 days to present their system, and they were asked to simulate the workflow of the institution or an improved re-engineered workflow so that they could make their own decisions, whether to stick to it with those things. Cutover to the new system was done on a specific date purely because the training was done very well. They used webinars and things like that to train people. They had certification for the training. So to ensure that the people who were trained knew exactly what they were doing, right? So there was no parallel run. There was no progressive implementation On that specific day, all 10 branches went live. There were challenges, as I said, because there was at different locations. I talk about webinars and video conferencing. Data migration, there was a challenge because of the history data. There were a lot of discussion in terms of how much of history data they require, because there's a lot of people, everybody needs to understand that data, or history data, has a lot of value. A lot of people don't even look at them. So these are things that needs to be done, especially when you do credit scoring in your institutions. The history data can play a major role. I can talk about that later, maybe at a different webinar. Cost overrun was just 5%, which was fantastic. So I hope I covered that fast.
Great, and if you just want to share, some of the do's and don'ts, I think you've covered some of the questions here. We'll take a couple questions after this slide, and then we'll answer the rest of the unanswered questions in our LinkedIn group under Capital Plus Exchange. So do you want to just finish with this slide, Malav?
Yeah, sure. So basically, do's are, you need to set up the project sponsor and the project team, as I mentioned. You need to follow the SDLC life cycle for sure. You have to be absolutely realistic in terms of project time. I mean, the management will want a system in 3 months. The sales director will want a system in 2 months or 2 weeks. Please tell them that, it takes time to get things like this done. So don't rush. Take your time, really, because these are important systems that you're implementing in your institution. You need to capture all project costs. Sometimes it's difficult to visualize. For that, you need to put in a contingency budget to ensure that you cover some of these costs. You need to set up clear criteria for project success. So, and also monitor, basically, you need to monitor risk. Things that you should never do is that don't give the IT manager the responsibility, the project responsibility, purely because he's there to provide you with a supporting role. He may not have the skills to do project management. If he does, he has to do it full time. He can't do his IT manager job and be the project manager also. Don't rely on the vendor to do all your work. Never do that. Also, don't wait till the end of the project to learn how much it cost. I think you need to get to know how much it costs every step of the way. Maybe monthly project budget reporting is a must to the steering committee. So that comes to the end of, now I think we'll open the floor for question and answers.
Great, great. Just two kind of quick things. Can you just go to the next slide, Malav? We do have another webinar coming up, so you can register for that event or the Beijing forum at our website, so feel free to take a look at that. And if you do have specific questions about our IT toolkit, if you're going through a conversion, I've had a couple institutions, send me a message that they want further information. Please let me know in the chat box, or else you can answer that within our survey at the end, and we'd be happy to speak to you more, about your conversion or our IT toolkit service as well. So, Malath, we've answered several of the questions within the session itself, but one question that we had was about the parallel run that you recommended. Can you just talk a little bit more about that, and specifically what the duration of the parallel run should be?
Okay, to tell you the truth, Jessica, I don't advocate parallel runs.
Okay.
To tell you the truth, what I say is that you need, when you procure a system, when you come to user acceptance testing, ensure that the testing is done with test cases and with test results. It has to be documented. Every step of the way, you test with, you can even get previous data or previous loan applications and stuff like that, and test it and document it to see whether the results are correct. You do that in the testing phase. After the testing phase is over, you send that team who did the testing, or you set up a team like train the trainers, a team, who will get involved in the UAT, who will go out and train your branch staff, as well as your head office staff. Now, you train them and you ensure that they are trained well. As I said, you can certify them whether they are trained or not by having a questionnaire or an online, test, to ensure that they know at the counter, the teller, how do you operate when a customer comes for a loan, with a loan application, how do you do it? You test all those things, and you get the TOT people or the branch manager to sign off saying that, yes, we are confident that we could use the systems directly without having any parallel runs. And what you do is you transfer all the data at a certain given date, probably at month end, and then you cut over and you run live straight off. You don't have the old system, you don't have the old registers, you don't have any of those things. And everybody who is working on the system has to ensure that it works, because they have already signed off say that it works. So that's the way to go about doing it. Parallel runs are in the past. The latest way of doing it is we don't run parallel runs. We ensure that we have an extended period of user acceptance testing and a training period, or more of an extended period, to ensure that everybody is trained properly and everybody is ready, and then you run live. So I hope I answered the question.
Great. And I think you touched at another point. We had quite a few questions about the user acceptance testing and agreeing to a time frame for that with the vendor and the financial institution. It sounds like with this institution they were running into a lot of problems with the time frame for the user acceptance testing not being adequate, and having some issues then with the vendor because that period of time was not adequate or not significant. Can you just share some sort of best practices for the user acceptance testing, and also how to deal with potentially difficult relationships with setting up this time frame with vendors?
Sure. Usually at contract negotiations with the vendor, you need to, in most cases, you see a very high-level implementation plan. You don't see a detailed implementation plan. So what you need to do is tell the vendor that you need a detailed implementation plan to ensure that the time that they have committed, some vendors say they can implement it in 90 days. And what you need to do is look at this detailed implementation plan and really understand whether this can be done in 90 days or not, or whether it needs 180 days. When you look at the implementation plan, you see that the user acceptance testing as well as the training of users are maybe a week or two, right? The experienced project manager will turn around and say, sorry, this doesn't work. This is not the way to do things. We need more time for the user acceptance test. And if the test fails, we roll back and add the same amount of time to go forward. So you put in certain controls and conditions to the vendor, saying that you're going to roll it back if the test fails, because I have seen situations where you go and do the testing and the results are all wrong. And then you have to go back to the vendor and say, look, this is wrong. Now, how do you catch up on that time? What you need to do is add that time. Whatever that has been spent, you keep on adding if the test fails, whether it's the vendor or whether it's the users. Now, often I have seen users not defining the user requirements properly or not communicating to the vendor properly, and this also will result in delays. So these are the things that needs to be managed as a good project manager, and that's one of the reasons I said, write in the RFP, getting the manual of procedures in place or your workflows in place is really key when it comes to UAT and the training and going live. So these three stages gets delayed or you face challenges if you don't define your user requirements at day one. So that's why I always say, when you see an RFP with 8 to 10 pages, I start shivering because I know that this is going to fail. And I always tell my client, please stop everything, roll back, let's write the RFP properly. Let's do this in detail, and then let's start the process all over again. So it's difficult to give I would say, a time period saying that it takes 3 months to do user acceptance testing or it takes a week. It all depends on the circumstances, and it all depends on the requirements.
Great. That's helpful. And, for that institution who is asking the questions, as I mentioned, if you'd like to, connect further with myself and with Mal, if we could set up a time to do that. Just the very, very last question. It sounds like a lot of institutions, have done something like this in the past, and maybe didn't have the buy-in that they needed from either their management or other stakeholders that are involved, and so they had some, poor results because of that. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the best practices in terms of having both, the kind of senior folks involved at an institution and other stakeholders, funders or other stakeholders who may be involved as well?
Sure, I can give you, this is a classic example that the procurement of the system, of a core banking system, came to the last stage, and the evaluation team sent up their recommendations to the board of directors for their final approval. And what happened was that the board of directors didn't have any information in terms of how this whole process was carried out and how they arrived at this decision. So this team had to go back, including the project manager, and educate the senior management, some CEO, to the board of directors, as well as this, the senior management team of the processes that they have gone through. And there were a lot of questions and criticism saying that you shouldn't have done this way, you shouldn't have done it that way. This would have been the better way of doing it. Why did you talk to this party? Why didn't you talk to that party? All these questions were coming up purely because there was no senior management buy-in and there was no communication to the management. So one of the key factors, key responsibilities of the project manager is to ensure that steering committee meetings are held, and the steering committee meeting is managed and staffed by at least 1 or 2 senior managers or a person from the board of directors. It's really important to do that. Having a session with the CEO, maybe once in 2 weeks or at least even once a month, to give him an update in terms of what is going on and what you have achieved, as well as the challenges faced, cost overruns, project delays. These type of updates are really key and necessary when you run a project. And if you do that, you will have the management buy-in and they will be in a position to make decisions. The worst case scenario is that this institution, after nearly, I would say, 14 months of work, when they went into the management, they had to roll back some of the processes, include some other vendors for evaluation. Things like that has to be done. And then what happens is you really lose focus and momentum. And at the end of the day, as you know, time is money. The cost overruns were really, really bad in this project. So senior management buying from day one, I think it's really key, especially for a project of this nature.
Great. Very, very helpful. Well, thanks so much, and thanks so much for our audience for sticking on through the whole question and answer. I think it was a very interesting session, Malith. And as I mentioned, if you do have further questions or interest in the IT toolkit that CapPlus offers, please do reach out to me or to Malith. We'd be happy to talk to you further about that and any other questions you have about IT conversion as well. So thanks so much to everyone for joining, and we will put up some of the questions on our LinkedIn page in the next day or two and invite you to join that discussion there.